Hey everybody, let's get into the female reproductive system. So the female reproductive system, the primary organ is the ovaries, and then we also have a duct system, including the uterine tubes, the uterus, and the vagina. And then we have external genitalia that function in the reproductive system. There we go. So here you can see the ovary, and here is that uterine tube that leads to the uterus. This is where implantation of the blastocyst occurs, where embryonic and fetal development occur. And then at the end, we have that cervical canal, and that leads into the vaginal canal, which is also known as the birth canal. So the ovaries are the primary sex organ for females. They produce the eggs, and they also produce hormones, estrogen, as well as progesterone. Each ovary houses follicles, ovarian follicles consisting of oocytes and follicular cells that surround the oocyte. And so here we have primary follicles. So you have a lot of primary follicles that sit in the ovaries. Females actually have all of their eggs. Before they are even born, they form all of their eggs. And so we have a lot of these primary follicles that just sit there. They're kind of arrested. They're kind of in a sleep mode until we hit puberty. As the follicles grow, they become these Graafian follicles or vesicular follicles, and you can see that egg in there. You see this fluid here, this fluid-filled antrum. This vesicular follicle is eventually going to rupture, and the egg itself with the germinal or with the corona radiata structure around it, the protective cells basically, leave the ovary and move into the fallopian tubes. That ruptured follicle is going to be converted into a corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum is here, and at the end of a monthly cycle, the corpus luteum degenerates into the corpus albicans, and then just degenerates completely. So we have the primary follicles, then we have the vesicular follicles, and primary follicles contain those immature oocytes. The vesicular follicle contains a maturing oocyte. Ovulation occurs, and that vesicular follicle bursts or ruptures, and that oocyte is then ejected into the fallopian tubes, and that ruptured follicle becomes the corpus luteum. So the ovaries are held in place. So they're held not only to the fallopian tubes, but in place in that pelvis to the wall by suspensory ligaments. So we have suspensory ligaments, and then we have ovarian ligaments that hold the ovaries to the uterus itself. And then we have a broad ligament that holds the ovaries and the uterus in place in that or within that peritoneal membrane. And so here you can see the suspensory ligament up here, and you can see uterosacral ligaments that are holding structures. Not so much the ovaries, but you can see those ligaments that are holding the uterus. If we go this way, then you can see that broad ligament, which helps to hold everything in place. So once the ovaries produce the egg has to move into the uterine tube. A lot of people in the past have thought that the uterine tube is connected directly to the ovaries, but it's not. It actually is an opening, but the egg actually, when it's released, could potentially, if the fallopian tubes aren't functioning properly, could potentially fall to the pelvic floor, and then it would degenerate because it couldn't get fertilized there. Then we have the uterus, where the growing embryo and fetus develop, and then the vaginal canal or birth canal. So let's look at the uterine tubes first. So this is the first part of the duct system. And typically the egg, once ovulated, is going to enter that uterine tube. So there are different regions to the uterine tube. You have the, and let me get a picture. Well, okay, so you have fimbriae. Fimbriae are the finger-like production or projections of the infundibulum. And the infundibulum is the first part of that uterine tube. So here are those fimbriae. And then this region right here is that infundibulum. So the fimbriae actually come in and they're like fingers. They pull the egg into the uterine tube. And then up here, we have the ampulla of the uterine tube. The ampulla of the uterine tube is the region where fertilization typically occurs. And then the tiny canal that leads into the uterus, that's known as the isthmus. The isthmus of the uterine tube is the end of that uterine tube where that leads into the uterus. It's also a site where a lot of ectopic pregnancies occur. So an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy outside of the uterus. I did not mention for the uterine tubes, there are ciliated cells. So the cilia are what move the egg because the egg is non-motile, so these cells are ciliated, which allows them to move towards the uterus itself. So the uterus then is a pear-shaped structure that takes in the fertilized egg, which at that point would be a blastocyst, and retains, so allows the blastocyst to embed in the uterine lining. It houses the embryo and fetus during development, and then holds on to that pregnancy until expulsion of the pregnancy. The uterus also has that broad ligament. It has the uterosacral ligament and round ligaments. So, oh, and let me go to a picture real quick. So, holy crowbars. Okay. Don't I have a good picture? I thought, there we go. Okay, I was going to say, I know I do. Here you can see the fundus of the uterus, the body of the uterus. So the body of the uterus is where the implantation typically occurs. And then the end of the uterus is known as that cervical canal. So that's this region right here, which leads into the vagina. This region is typically filled with a mucus that's thick and sticky to protect the growing embryo slash fetus. And once a month when you're not pregnant, this thick mucus thins out and becomes more watery, allowing sperm to move in. And you can see the round ligament, you can see the you should be able to see the utrico, well, there's the ovarian ligament, there's an ovarian ligament. I guess you can't see the utricosacral ligament on this picture, but you do see that round ligament here also, or the round, and I'm sorry, and you see the broad ligament. That's what I was meaning. So I'm going to go back because I kind of jumped. I talked about these parts and I talked about these, but now I'm going to go to the layers of the uterus. So we have three main layers, or three layers of the uterus. The internal layer of the uterus is known as the endometrium. This is the lining of the uterus that each month thickens up just in case we have fertilization of an egg. And each month, if no fertilization occurs, no pregnancy occurs, then that endometrial lining sloughs off. And that's what is released during your menstruation. Then we have a thick, smooth muscle layer called the myometrium. The myometrium is the smooth muscle that contracts during during menstruation, during labor and delivery, during pregnancy. And it also contracts when a baby suckles during breastfeeding. And then the outer region is known as the perimetrium. It's the visceral lining of the peritoneum. It's a serous layer, or it's a serous membrane that lines the entire uterus. The last region of the duct system is the vagina. The vagina is the organ of copulation for females. It is the passageway for the baby, so it's also known as the birth canal. It's also a passageway for the release of the endometrial lining during your menstrual cycle. And so here you can see that vaginal canal right here. And here you can see that uterosacral ligament, which is what I was looking for in the other picture. Apologies for not seeing it. Well, I couldn't see it before. So here's that vaginal canal. Here's the cervical canal, and then here is the uterus itself. You can see the three linings, the outer linings, the perimetrium, then you have that myometrium, and then the endometrium is right in here. And this is the layer that thickens and thins out every month. And I showed you this figure already, so I'm going to go to the next slide, okay? All right, so at this point, you should be able to tell me what are the female reproductive organs, what is the function of these organs, what are the follicles that we find. We have primary and vesicular, and then we also have the corpus luteum, which is a follicle that has already expelled its egg. What occurs during ovulation? What is the corpus luteum, which I just mentioned? What is the function of the uterine tube? What is the function of the uterus? What is the function of the vagina? What are fimbriae? And what are the layers of the uterus? I'm going to stop here. It's a 13-minute video, and we'll get into the external genitalia next. Bye.